Jida had always believed he was doing the right thing. After all, how could anyone fault a man for helping a poor widow? That was how he justified every act of attention he gave to Obagi, a woman he described as pure, selfless, and morally upright. She had taken a vow never to be with another man after her husband's death, and Jida saw that as a badge of honor. In his mind, Obagi wasn't a threat, she was untouchable. He found comfort in her presence, in her calm demeanor, in the way she seemed to understand him without judgment. To him, this was not cheating. This was compassion. This was charity. And whenever his wife, Dima, raised her concerns, he brushed them off with self-righteousness, telling her she was overreacting and jealous. He truly believed that because there was no physical intimacy, there was no betrayal, but what he failed to see was that emotional infidelity often cuts deeper than the physical kind. Obagi had become the first person he ran to with news, concerns, or decisions, something that used to be Dima's role in his life. As the relationship deepened, Jida no longer made an effort to hide his attachment to Obagi. He came home talking about her, defending her character, and praising her virtues. He even went as far as telling Dima that she should consider Obagi like the prodigal son deserving of sympathy, attention, and acceptance. That analogy was the final straw for Dima. She couldn't understand how her husband was so blinded. For years, she had stood by his side, cared for their children, supported his dreams, and now he was investing his time, money, and emotions into another woman and emotions into another woman, and asking her to not only accept it, but also embrace it. And what did Obagi do to earn such loyalty? She made no sacrifices for Jida. She gave nothing back except her calculated silence and mysterious aura. Dima saw through her. She saw the manipulation, the quiet control Obagi had over her husband, and she knew this woman was far from innocent. Still, every time she spoke up, Jida accused her of being bitter, unreasonable, and unsupportive. He refused to see how he was slowly destroying his own marriage, hiding behind the excuse of helping a widow. What made it worse was that Jida began to redefine faithfulness in his own terms. As long as he wasn't sleeping with Obagi, he believed he was still a loyal husband. But his loyalty had shifted. Dima no longer had a voice in their marriage. Her opinions were secondary, her emotions dismissed. Whenever she tried to express how hurt she felt, Jida responded with spiritual platitudes or turned things around, blaming her for not being more understanding. He even started hiding phone calls, avoiding any mention of favors done for Obagi, not because he saw them as wrong, but because he didn't want to deal with Dima's nagging. And in doing so, he drove a deeper wedge into their relationship. Dima, who once shared every part of her life with her husband, now found herself living like a stranger in her own home. The emotional abandonment was worse than any physical affair. She watched as her husband slipped further away, not into the arms of another woman, but into the fantasy of being someone's savior. Jida didn't see it yet, but the woman he thought he was rescuing had already taken everything from him: his focus, his affection, and soon his family. For years, Dima silently endured the slow unraveling of her marriage. At first, she tried to be patient, convincing herself that her husband's obsession with Obagi was just a phase, that he would eventually snap out of it and return to her emotionally. But as time passed, it became clear that Jida wasn't just helping a widow, he was emotionally invested, and Dima was no longer a priority in his life. The man who once held her hand through the ups and downs now looked right through her, as if she were invisible. The loneliness crept in slowly, but it stayed like a shadow. The house used to be full of life and laughter, especially when the children were around. But as they grew up and left for university, the silence became deafening. Without her children to distract her, Dima could no longer ignore the aching void left by her husband's absence, even though he still lived under the same roof. With each passing day, her mental and physical health began to decline. She couldn't sleep through the night anymore. Her thoughts would spiral into anxiety and what ifs, playing imaginary conversations where she begged Jita to see her pain, to acknowledge her presence, but they always ended the same way, with him choosing someone else. The constant emotional strain began to show physically. Headaches became a daily routine, and a visit to the doctor revealed that she had developed high blood pressure. She was prescribed medication and told to stop overthinking, but how could she? How do you switch off the part of you that's constantly hurting? Her daughter, Adugo, was alarmed when she heard the news. She urged her mother to prioritize her health and let go of the things causing her pain, but Dima knew it wasn't that simple. You don't just let go of your husband and your home. The heartbreak she carried wasn't something that could be turned off, it had roots, deep ones. The situation reached a breaking point when Jita brought home medication and casually mentioned that Obagai had gotten it for her. He said it with such innocence, like it was no big deal, even smiled while handing it over, completely oblivious to how insulting it was. To Dima, it felt like a slap in the face. She stared at the packet in disbelief, then exploded in anger. "So now she's my nurse too?" she yelled, throwing the medicine across the room. "You and your concubine want to kill me now?" It wasn't just about the pills, it was the realization that her husband truly didn't see the harm he was causing. He couldn't understand why she was so upset, and instead of apologizing, he accused her of being bitter and unforgiving. He quoted the Bible, claiming her bitterness was the root of her illness. That night, Dima locked herself in her children's old room and cried harder than she had in years. Her heart felt like it was collapsing under the weight of everything she had bottled up. And when she finally fell asleep from exhaustion, she woke up with a quiet resolve. She had to be strong, if not for herself, then for her children. Her husband might never come back to her emotionally, but she refused to let his choices destroy what little strength she had left. For a brief moment, it felt like the sun came out again. One evening, Jita returned home unusually early and surprised Dima by asking her to get dressed. He was taking her out to dinner. Dima was stunned. She couldn't remember the last time he had invited her anywhere, let alone for something as thoughtful as a dinner date. Part of her wanted to refuse, to remind him how many nights she cried herself to sleep because of his neglect. But another part of her, the one still clinging to a tiny thread of hope, accepted. She got dressed in quiet disbelief, letting herself enjoy this rare gesture. The restaurant was beautiful and calm, filled with soft music and warm lighting. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to relax. That night, they even went to a comedy show, and for a few hours, Dima laughed freely. The tightness in her chest, the one that had been her constant companion, faded. She had almost forgotten what joy felt like. As they walked out of the venue, Dima felt something like peace, maybe even love. But the moment was shattered when a security guard, unaware of who she was, greeted Jita with a smile and asked, "Madam, no follow you come today?" Her heart dropped. Oh, of course, he wasn't talking about her. He was talking about Obejai. Gima said nothing at that moment. She smiled faintly, let it pass, but deep down it was like someone had poured cold water over her. So this was not a spontaneous act of love. This was probably a suggestion from Obeji or maybe even guilt. Dima knew then that this dinner was never truly about her. It was a performance, a bandage, not a cure. She thanked her husband that night and went to bed with a heavy heart. Days passed, then weeks, and Jita never repeated the gesture. Whatever little light had shone that evening was quickly dimmed again by the reality that nothing had changed. Dima's health issues returned: the headaches, the insomnia, the feeling of emptiness. Her children eventually graduated, and while she was incredibly proud, she also felt more alone than ever. They moved on with their lives, and rightly so, but it left her without even the daily comfort of their presence. And still, Jita remained distant. He made no effort to reconnect, no attempt to repair the cracks he had caused. He simply went back to his routine, present in body, absent in every other way. Unknown to Jita, his children were not blind. They saw the way things used to be, the laughter that used to fill the house, and how everything had changed when Obage entered their father's life. Even as they tried to stay out of their parents' business, it hurt them to see their mother suffer in silence. Dima never complained out loud, never said a word to make her children feel responsible, but they noticed. They noticed how she looked tired even after a full night's sleep, how she forced a smile every time they called, how she deflected questions about their father. She tried to shield them, but the truth always has a way of slipping through, they knew. And while they couldn't fix it, they carried the quiet resentment toward their father for not choosing his own family first. Dima, meanwhile, learned how to survive in pieces. She took care of her home like always, responded to Jita politely, and never brought up Obijai again. But in her heart, she had stopped expecting anything from him. That single dinner became a memory, not a turning point. And for Dima's survival no longer meant fixing her marriage, it meant learning to exist within its ruins. When Dima left to stay with Arudo during her pregnancy, it was like she had stepped out of a storm and into the calm. For the first time in years, she could breathe without the constant weight of Jita's indifference pressing on her chest. Adugo and her husband, Shagun, welcomed her warmly, and Dima quickly threw herself into caring for her daughter. It gave her purpose again. She woke up early, cooked meals, cleaned the house, and made sure Arugo took her prenatal vitamins. It was more than just helping, she was healing. She found joy in the little things. The sound of laughter between her daughter and son-in-law, the feeling of being appreciated, the silence that wasn't heavy or sad. And when the baby finally arrived, Dima felt something she hadn't felt in years, pure, unfiltered happiness. She cared for her grandson with a kind of tenderness only a woman who had known deep pain could give. At night, she would sit in the rocking chair, holding the baby, whispering gentle prayers and lullabies, and in those moments, she felt whole again. But peace has a way of being temporary when your wounds are unresolved. 2 months after the birth, Jita called, asking her when she planned to return home. Dima's heart sank. She had almost forgotten the constant ache that came with thinking about that house, about that man, about Obeja. She gave him excuses, told him she was still recovering, still on medication, but deep down, she just wasn't ready. The thought of returning to that life made her chest tighten, the headaches returned. She tried to hide it, but Adugo noticed. One night, she walked into her mother's room and found Dima sitting on the bed, lost in thought. Gently, she pressed her to open up. Dima resisted at first, but the dam finally broke. She cried loud, broken sobs, and poured out everything she had held inside for years: the betrayal, the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible in her own marriage. She confessed that she had once hoped Jita would wake up and come back to her, but now she saw that his heart had already been given away. Not physically, but emotionally entirely. Arugo listened in shock, angry that her father had allowed things to go so far. "But Ma?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Are you sure he's not sleeping with her?" Dima gave a bitter smile. "That's the worst part. He's not. If he were, maybe he would have gotten tired of her, but he's not. And that's how she controls him. She plays the perfect, untouchable widow, and your father falls for it every single time. Meanwhile, I'm the one left to rot in silence." For the first time, Adugo saw the full extent of her mother's suffering, and it broke her. She wanted to confront her father, to shout at him, but Dima gently stopped her. "Let me handle it," she said. "This is my battle. I've lived it for years." That night, Adugo told Shigun everything. And suddenly, things that had confused him at the wedding made sense. Why the strange woman was always close to Jita. why the connection between them felt like more than just friendship. He couldn't understand how a man would neglect his own family for someone who had clearly played him. But he also saw the deeper issue. Jita wasn't being held captive. He had chosen this path. And until he chose to walk away from it, no one, not even his daughter, could force him to change. Jita continued to pressure Dima to return home, calling more frequently and growing impatient with her vague excuses. She kept telling him she was still recovering, still tired, still under medication, but in truth, she simply wasn't ready to walk back into a house where she had spent years feeling unloved and unseen. The peace she found in her daughter's home felt like a small slice of freedom, and she wasn't ready to give that up. But eventually the pressure reached its peak. One day, Adugo, unable to hold back anymore, called her father and let her emotions pour out. "How would you feel if my own husband did what you're doing to Mom?" she snapped. "You've abandoned your own family for a stranger. You don't call, you don't ask about us, you don't even realize how broken Mom is. You say you're helping a widow while your own wife is suffering. You've stopped being a father and we're tired." Her words hit hard, and Jita, instead of reflecting, reacted with anger. He immediately called Dima and lashed out. "So now you're turning my children against me," he barked. "You're feeding them lies, painting me like the villain. I'm warning you, if you want this marriage to survive, you have 1 week to come back. If not, it's over." The ultimatum stunned Dima. She had spent years silently waiting for her husband to choose her, to see her pain, to change. And now he was threatening to end it all just because she took time to care for herself and her grandchild. She didn't know what to say. When she told Adugo what happened, the young woman was furious, but her husband, Shigun, gently stepped in with a practical suggestion. Take her back home, at least to protect the marriage from collapsing completely. They traveled together back to Jita's house, and the tension in the air was thick the moment they arrived. Jita looked at Dima as if she were a traitor, but Shigun, calm and respectful, asked for a private word. "Sir," he said, "please don't see this as me interfering, but I've come to care for your family. And from where I stand, your wife is hurting deeply. I know you think you're helping someone else, but you're hurting her in the process. No woman wants to share her husband, not even emotionally. Please try to see things from her perspective. It's not just about Obeji. It's about your marriage." Jita listened, but quickly returned to his old defense. "I'm not having an affair," he insisted. "I haven't even touched that woman. I'm only helping her because God placed that responsibility on my heart." Dima refuses to understand. She's full of bitterness. "I've tried everything, but she's the one killing this marriage." Shigun walked away quietly, but he had heard enough. Jita wasn't just stubborn, he was blind. He had elevated Obegaiti to saint-like status while painting his own wife as bitter and unreasonable. That night, Adugo tried one last time to mediate between her parents. She asked them both to speak their truth. Jita repeated his narrative that he was helping a helpless widow, that his wife was being overly emotional, and that she should be grateful to still have a husband. Dima, unable to contain herself, fired back. Grateful for what? For being ignored? For being replaced? "He says he's with me, but I haven't felt like his wife in years. He doesn't buy me anything. He doesn't see me. And that woman, Obagai, she's the one who has his attention, his time, his loyalty. I've tried, I've stayed quiet. But he expects me to just accept this like a fool." As she spoke, her voice cracked under the weight of years of pain. Jita, refusing to admit fault, got up and walked out on both of them. It was the final blow. Dima turned to her daughter and simply said, "I'm done." And for the first time in her life, she meant it. Dima left without looking back. She packed her few belongings and returned with Adugo and Shigun to their home, bringing her grandson into her arms as if to shield herself from the heartbreak she had long carried. Jita didn't try to stop her. He was too caught up in his own ego to see the finality in her decision. In his mind, she would return just like all the other times she forgave, swallowed her pain, and stayed silent. But this time was different. Dima was done being invisible. She moved into a small apartment Adugo helped her rent, and with support from her son Zeet, she opened a modest local restaurant. For the first time in a long time, she was living for herself. There were no whispers of another woman lurking in the background, no phone calls she wasn't allowed to question, no dinners meant to pacify her guilt. Just peace. She smiled more, her health improved, her eyes slowly began to sparkle again. She'd missed herself, and now, piece by piece, she was coming back. Meanwhile, Jida's life took a sharp turn. He continued to show up at Obegi's house, only to find it locked. After a few days of no contact, he finally called her, and to his shock, she picked up with a tone colder than he had ever heard before. She told him she had moved on, relocated with her children to a new state, and didn't need his help anymore. "Thank you for everything," she said, "but it's time for you to go back to your family. I need a fresh start." Then she hung up and blocked his number. Jida stood frozen. The woman he had abandoned his family for had walked away without hesitation, without gratitude, without looking back. Panic began to set in, followed by guilt, then fear. He tried calling Dima, she didn't answer. Tried calling Adugo, she told him to focus on his new family. Zait didn't even pretend to be polite. "You made your choice," he said. "Now live with it." One by one, the people who once called him father, husband, family shut the door. He suffered a heart attack shortly after and was rushed to the hospital. Though he survived, he was left with partial paralysis. No one came to visit. In the end, Jida lost everything. His business collapsed, his employees stole from him, and he sold what little he had to survive. Alone, unable to walk properly, he moved back to his village where no one truly cared for him. He died a forgotten man, buried by distant relatives with no wife or children at his side. His story, while painful, is not uncommon. In trying to be a savior to another, he abandoned those who needed him most. In chasing a fantasy, he destroyed his reality. It's a lesson that echoes beyond the screen. Love is not proven by grand gestures to outsiders, but by presence, consistency, and loyalty at home. Being a provider doesn't excuse emotional absence. Many families today are crumbling, not because of money, but because of hearts that have drifted. Let Jida's story serve as a wake-up call. If you're lucky enough to have people who love you, don't wait until they walk away to realize their worth. You don't always get a second chance.